Diplomacy deadlock. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine continue to rise, with warnings an attack could come this week. As the Russian military build-up continues, here the Defence Secretary cuts short his family holiday, while those in Ukraine remain resolute.
I believe that Ukraine will resist. I believe that we will win. We have such experience. We're much more stronger than even before. But we need civilized world to be right now with us.
Also tonight, an NHS doctor is arrested on suspicion of sexual assault. More than 100 other cases of concern are now being looked into. Plus, chaos as the mezzanine floor of a bar collapses on people below. Around a dozen are injured. And
Malins with the threat, Smith with the try. First time England have
redemption in Rome as England get their first win in the Six Nations, hammering the Italians at home.
This is ITV News with Lucy Watson.
Good evening. Fears that Russia may attack Ukraine imminently are continuing to build as the Defence Secretary today cut short a family holiday and headed home. It follows increasingly strong warnings from the US and its Western allies. Tonight, the US President Joe Biden is holding talks with the President of Ukraine. But as foreign nationals leave the country, there are concerns time may be running out, with a number of airlines said to be considering cancelling all flights to the country. With the latest from Kiev, here's our correspondent Dan Rivers.
With Russia engaged in massive live-fire exercises around Ukraine's border, today's civilian airlines started to reassess whether it is now safe to fly into the country. Most airlines are still operating into Kiev, but KLM has now cancelled all flights. And yesterday, a budget carrier, SkyUp, was forced to divert a plane mid-air because the owner of the aircraft banned it from entering what is increasingly seen as a high-risk zone. And now there are reports major aviation insurers have put carriers on notice that from tomorrow they will no longer underwrite their flights in Ukrainian airspace, meaning the Ukrainian government might have to carry the risk. In a further sign of the deteriorating security assessment, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who was in Moscow this week, has cut short a long weekend abroad with his family as experts continue to monitor Russian troop movements. Paul Nyland has lived in Ukraine for almost 2 decades, watching the increasing pressure exerted by Russia, and says Putin's troops would face a tough fight.
The people of this city will resist, and there's no way that Vladimir Putin can hold this. Where I really fear that we're going to see the horrors of this enhanced conflict if he goes ahead is in the east of Ukraine, in the areas around the territory that's currently occupied by Russia.
In the spiritual heart of Ukraine, people were today reflecting on the increasingly dire warnings from the West. St. Michael's Monastery has survived countless conflicts past, but now those gathered beneath its golden domes are contemplating a new threat. Around the perimeter of this ancient church is a montage of the fallen, the faces of soldiers and police killed since the separatist uprisings in 2014, with some wondering if many more are now about to die defending their country.
I believe that Ukraine will resist. I believe that we will win. We have such experience. We're much more stronger than even before. But we need civilized world to be right now with us.
Tonight, Ukraine's links with the rest of the world are looking increasingly fragile, with serious questions about how long international flights can continue to operate. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Kiev.
Well, back here, and the Defence Secretary, who has cut short his ski holiday, has likened the diplomatic efforts to stop a Russian invasion to the failed appeasement of Nazi Germany during World War II. Well, our political correspondent, Carl Dennon, is at the Ministry of Defence tonight. Carl, what does Ben Wallace mean by saying this?
Well, his remarks have been interpreted as an attack on the diplomatic efforts being made by some Western allies, and certainly the Ukrainians see it that way. The ambassador to London has criticised it, saying this is not the time to attack our friends, especially drawing an analogy with a failed strategy. But I'm told that that is not what Ben Wallace was referring to. What he meant rather was that if Russia does invade Ukraine, then the muted Western response to previous Russian aggression in Georgia and Crimea will come to be seen as having appeased him and made him thought that he could probably get away with it. And we must be careful with taking this appeasement analogy too far in any event, because ministers have been making perfectly clear, as Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, did this morning, that the UK will not be fighting a war over Ukraine.
Ukraine is not part of NATO, and therefore it has a different involvement and response from us in a military sense. We have been working with Ukraine and supporting them as they've thanked us for nationally and openly since 2015 with training of troops and defensive mechanisms, but it's not about us having a military involvement directly in Ukraine, because they're not actually at the moment part of NATO.
Now, a more recent mistake that Ben Wallace is keen to avoid is that made by Dominic Raab when he failed to return from holiday during the Afghan crisis. As has been reported, Mr Wallace was on a family break this weekend. ITV learned that he was away, but he said that he had already decided when we got in contact with him to cut it short, and he'll be back at his desk here tomorrow.
Carl, thank you. A doctor in the West Midlands has been arrested on suspicion of sexual assault after two NHS trusts identified more than 100 cases of concern. Police say the 34-year-old man, who hasn't been named, was arrested in December last year. A helpline has now been set up for anyone who is worried. Now, Martin Stew is here with me now. Martin, what more do we know about this case?
Well, what we have now, Lucy, is what's called a major incident investigation, with two NHS trusts working with the police to look in after this doctor was arrested on suspicion of sexual assault. Now, it's reported that that arrest follows complaints from parents of vulnerable patients about his conduct. And this isn't the first time that particular doctor has been under scrutiny. In fact, 4 years ago, there was investigation into the 34-year-old who works in A&E, obstetrics and gynaecology, but he was allowed to return to work at the Royal Stoke University Hospital because the police said there was insufficient evidence. He was then arrested in December last year following the most recent complaints. Dudley NHS Foundation Trust, which runs Russell Hall Hospital, where he also worked, had actually said that he was excluded from his role and restrictions were put in place by the General Medical Council. As a result of all these allegations, well, Staffordshire Police have launched Operation Anzu, with NHS looking at doctors' work from both hospitals. The Sunday Times, who reported and broke this story, say hundreds of cases are now being reviewed, more than 100 allegedly of concern, and the decision to drop that initial investigation also being reviewed. Parents of potential victims will be approached. The NHS trusts, well, they say they can't comment because this is still under investigation. As for the doctor himself, he is currently on police bail. He's in the West Midlands, and he says, according to the Sunday Times, that he denies any criminal wrongdoing.
Martin, thank you. Police in Canada are trying to remove a group of truckers who've been blocking a bridge on the US border for almost a week. They're part of what is being called the Freedom Convoy that has led to a number of protests. They're demanding the government lifts the requirement for anyone crossing the border to be fully vaccinated. Switzerland has voted to ban tobacco advertising in a nationwide referendum. The yes vote will, in effect, lead to a complete ban. The move will bring the country in line with its European neighbours. And the World Anti-Doping Agency says it will investigate the adults working with teen Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva. Last week, it emerged the 15-year-old who won gold at Beijing failed a drugs test in December. A hearing to decide her fate is taking place today, with a result expected tomorrow. Around a dozen people have been injured after a mezzanine floor collapsed at a bar in East London. Those inside the pub have been telling ITV News about the chaos that followed. People inside there at the time said they heard creaking before it fell apart. Helen Keenan has the story.
A loud rumble, likened to the sound of an earthquake. It took just seconds for the mezzanine floor in this East London pub to crumple. Those who managed to pull themselves to safety then returned to save those still trapped in the remains. This photo was taken by a customer in the moments after the collapse.
Pretty much buried in the benches, the tables, rucksacks, pint glasses, and then of course you hear the screaming. Another reason why I was so angry, there were kids there as well.
Declared a major incident, firefighters used ladders to rescue those still stuck, buried in the debris, whilst air ambulance crew and paramedics treated those below. Tom Marsland was among those having a pint that night. He escaped with just cuts and bruises. Today, he said those inside say it was fortunate that no one was killed.
You kind of knew what was about to happen a second before, but there's nothing could do about it, and then the floor just kind of gave way. People were stuck and there was a lot of panic, but I think what's really stuck with me is how everyone immediately started helping each other, like lifting people out, holding tables so people wouldn't get crushed.
The pub's owners have since posted on social media that the venue remains closed and that their thoughts are with everyone affected. While there is some comfort that the area underneath wasn't yet full to capacity, more customers were due to arrive, and those affected hope they find out quickly how the floor managed to give way. Helen Keenan, ITV News.
To the Winter Olympics now, where there's been victories for both Team GB's men and women curling teams. This morning, the women's team beat Denmark, moving them up to third in the standings. The men's team beat China 7-6, then took on the Danes, winning 8 points to 2, which puts them one step closer to the semi-finals. In the Premier League, Newcastle beat Aston Villa with a free kick from Kieran Trippier, making it the club's third win in a row and moving the team clear of the relegation zone. Elsewhere, Tottenham have dropped out of the top 7 with defeat to Wolves, while Liverpool beat Burnley. And West Ham defender Kurt Zouma had to withdraw from today's match against Leicester after complaining of feeling unwell. He had been included in the starting lineup despite the controversy over him kicking his pet cat. In the Six Nations, England have secured their first victory of the tournament in Rome. The visitors cruised to victory, scoring 5 tries along the way in a commanding performance. England coach Eddie Jones praised his players, but said his team still needs to improve. Stuart Silvers was watching.
Coach Eddie Jones has been talking about a new England for next year's World Cup. He picked a young side after last week's defeat to Scotland, and it was one of those young stars who opened the scoring in Rome.
Smith with the try. First time England have really put their words together.
Jones had also invoked Muhammad Ali as an inspiration for his players this week, and the forwards were definitely winning the heavyweight contest.
And the tries scored in the end.
A fourth England try just before half-time, and the game was effectively over.
And England will have a try, yes!
Italy haven't won a Six Nations match in 7 years, and they've never beaten England. And even when they got into a good position, they squandered any effort to actually get on the score sheet.
Another mistake by Italy.
Italy were much improved in the second half, but it was still just a case of how many the men in white were going to score.
Attacking against 14 and scoring against 14.
Well, it was a special atmosphere. There was loads of English fans come out to support us, so we had to put on a show for them, and I thought we did that in parts. We were a bit scrappy in parts.
33 points to 0 the final score. England bouncing back, but still room for improvement. Stuart Silvers, ITV News.
And finally, it's the kind of letter everyone wants to receive. But a cheque in the post for more than £3 trillion was sadly too good to be true. The cheque that one customer posted online was meant to be compensation after they were left without power after Storm Arwen in November. Northern Power Grid has apologised to the 74 customers who received one. One of those joked to the company, "Are you sure you can afford this?" Not to worry. That's it from us for now. I'm back with the late news just after 10 o'clock. Bye-bye.